All right, here we are. I'm Margaret Frondorf. I'm the Director of SAIS Alumni Relations, and I'm here with John Childers, who's with the class of 64, but we're here in Bologna, Italy, because he's with his class of 63, having attended Bologna in that year. So I'm thrilled you're here. John, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions.
Thank you, Margaret.
And I'm going to just ask you first, how did you find SAIS, and how did you find the Bologna Center?
I was a graduate of DePaul University in Indiana, and in my senior year I knew I wanted to do international relations. 1962 was a year that people were very excited about the new young president. A lot of college graduates wanted to come to DC and be involved in that. So I applied to Georgetown and University of Pittsburgh and Johns Hopkins International Relations, and Georgetown accepted me, but Johns Hopkins accepted me and said, by the way, we accept you and give you a scholarship, but only on the condition you go to Europe for your first year of graduate school, and we'll pay your way to Bologna. So that was something I could not turn down, and so I came to Bologna, class of 63, and then finished in SAIS the following year in 64.
So tell me about a vivid memory being in Bologna. What stands out?
Well, there was personal memories and also, should we say, political memories. Possibly one of the bigger memories was the fall of '62. The Cuban Missile Crisis came shortly after we arrived here. And every day you'd read in the paper, imminent threat of nuclear war, the Russians are shipping missiles to Cuba, everything's going to happen. And at a certain point, when it got very close, some of the American students started getting calls from their parents back home. Come home, war is imminent. And, come home, get out of there. And we said, are you nuts? It's a lot safer here in Bologna than it is in the States or in Washington, obviously, if the war does break out. So no one went home, but I do remember that as being all-consuming for several days. That combined with the fact that Bologna at the time was controlled by the Communist Party made life very interesting that year in the political debates. Bologna was called La Dota, the educated, La Grassa, the fat, and La Rosa for the communist control of the city at that time. So being an American in Bologna politically was very interesting in those days.
Is there a class or two that sticks out in your mind?
Well, I loved several of my classes. I had Federico Mancini talking about Italian politics, and Jean-Baptiste Durazel came down from Paris, and Altiero Spinelli, later a commissioner of the European communities, was my professors. I had a great set of professors, and they were just wonderful. One of my classmates, Heinz Seidinger, taught German. They had no one else to teach a German class in those days, so he taught a few of us German. So those are the professors I remember.
So going back to Washington, then you finished out your second year. Talk about a memory in Washington that stands out for you.
Well, I'll have to think about that.
And or any classes that stand out, or something social that has nothing to do with SAIS but enriched your life.
Well, I'm really having trouble trying to. Let's go back to that later. Most of my memories are about Bologna, which was
interesting.
Yeah, that's very vivid. SAIS is not nearly as vivid as Bologna was. I enjoyed my classes more in Bologna. I thought the professors were better here. And I really enjoyed my life much here, much more.
So life after SAIS, your career path. Talk a little bit about that transition and perhaps how SAIS played a role in you finding your professional pathway.
Well, it was easier for me and my classmates, I think, than it is easier now. I was born in 1941. I was even I'm not a baby boomer, I'm a pre-baby boomer. And the birth rate was so high, or so low in the last few years of the Depression and World War II, that when we graduated from college 20 years later, there were comparatively few people going into the job market for jobs that were available. I don't know of a classmate of mine graduating from SAIS that had trouble finding a job. So I went off to Wall Street to make my fame and fortune with Morgan Guaranty Trust Company, which I disliked very much. And a year later, I got a call from the dean of SAIS, said, we'd really like you to come back. We liked you when you were here. Could you come back and fundraise for Bologna? So I went back as an assistant to Dean Wilcox at the time. Worked for SAIS, Bologna, for 3 years. And after which I went to the Hill as an economic assistant to Congressman on the Ways and Means Committee, and then stayed on Capitol Hill for 20 years, which was the next phase of my career in a variety of posts there. That's
an extraordinary time on the Hill. One vivid memory on the Hill for you. Share that with us.
Well, it's there's so many. It's hard to debating John Tower over whether or not I could help influence Senator Percy to vote against the SALT Treaty. Composing legislation which became part of the law, Social Security law, for enabling people to get certain benefits they wouldn't have had, creating the Congressional Budget Act when I was at the minority staff director of the Senate Government Relations Committee. We created the Senate Budget Act. We created inspector generals in all the agencies. We created the successor to the Civil Service Commission, which is acronym and name I'm forgetting at the moment. But we did an awful lot in those days, because there was a consensus at that time. People did work together. That's been lost. I worked for what in those days were called moderate Republicans. There are no moderate Republicans anymore. The Congress seems to be totally polarized. So, but we thought we were doing a good job, and we worked hard. Going back to my most vivid memory being at SAIS was probably not something that happened at SAIS, but I walked out of my apartment one afternoon after studying for an exam and walked down to the street, and it was odd. There was a TV on in the drugstore down at the base, and President Kennedy had just been shot. And I spent the weekend on the street. I was at the Capitol when the caisson came by with his coffin on it, being drawn to the Capitol. A day or two later, I was standing at the corner of Connecticut and Rhode Island, near St. Matthew's Cathedral, when coming up the street was walking from the White House. In the front row was Haile Selassie of Ethiopia, Charles de Gaulle of France, Ludwig Erhard, the Chancellor of Germany, and I was just a certain number of feet from them as they were walking up Connecticut Avenue from the White House to go to the funeral mass at St. Matthew's. So this was a very vivid memory of that weekend, and I was sort of part of history that weekend.
Yeah, I would say. So students leaving SAIS these days, their dream is international. It's knowing more about the world, and if you could offer advice to students now, given your career, how would you advise them as they think about finding a job in today's world?
Well, you need to have certain technical skills. I would say learning one or two foreign languages fluently is vital. I see that at my own family, the next generation. My son and my daughter-in-law have very successful careers overseas because they speak the foreign language. They not only have the skills, but they speak the foreign language and are comfortable in working in a foreign environment. And they've been working overseas for 10 years. So I think that's very vital. And I think SAIS does that. When I was there, we mainly taught European languages, but I know that's broadened out now. So but I would say that's very very important. But learn other skills, learn graphic design, learn computers. I mean, even if you're going to be an economist, you know, you need these other skills as well. They all come in handy.
So you're actually celebrating your 50th year since you were at the Bologna Center.
Yes.
So I want to congratulate you on that.
Thank you.
And next year, I hope you'll join us in Washington for really the 50th of the class of 64.
Yes, well, let me just share a couple personal memories from '63,
Okay.
which I'm sure people don't have that experience anymore. Most of my classmates and I came to Bologna by ship from New York. So I already met a number, maybe half dozen of my classmates on the ship that landed in Genoa before we ever got here. So we did that. There were no cell phones in those days. Most of us lived in one building, Via degli Orti 84. And there was only one phone in the building, which is in one apartment. So if you got an emergency call, hopefully whoever was in that apartment would come and find you. If you wanted to make a phone call, you had to go downtown to the post office, give them the number you wanted to call, wait until your turn was called, and go into a little booth, and your phone might or might not be connected to the call. Maybe this is still true, but we were a marrying group of people. So my classmates got married, Nadine and Axel got married. We also started marrying the staff of the Bologna Center. And we took away the staff with our class, and so including the receptionist, Nicoletta, who was gorgeous, but so there was a lot of that going on. And I remember the very first party I went to. A friend, Joe Parise from Rhode Island, who spoke a little Italian, and I were downtown in La Standa. I don't know if that's still a store here or not. And we invited several of the sales ladies, young ladies, to come over to Via degli Orti for a party, and said, bring your friends. And so there was a lot of American guys and a lot of Italian ladies showed up, along with 3 of their mothers. So, to make sure that nothing...
those were the days.
Those were the days when, yes, the mothers chaperoned their daughters at parties. So it was a fabulous year. We just had a great time.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. That was, any other thoughts before we close?
No, I think that's it. But Hopkins was very important. I had the experience in Europe. It did set me up for my first job, and then the other jobs sort of came fairly easily after that. But again, I feel sorry for people graduating these days. The economy is bad. The population growth has been higher, and as I said earlier, when I graduated from graduate school, it was at a trough in the population. So most employers were looking for people in those days.
Well, the good news, it's 2013, it's not 2008.
Yes, that's true. That's
so
true.
We're at least looking up. So I want to thank you, John, for sharing the memories. We want to be part of the early days of SAIS, and we can do that through interviewing you and other classmates. And
well, it was. I really appreciate Johns Hopkins very much, and it's a great school. And not only did I go to school here, but I worked for the university, and now my son-in-law works for Hopkins in Baltimore. So Johns Hopkins has been part of my family's life for a long time.
And it will continue to be.
Yes,
so,
evidently.
Well, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Margaret.